So I'm Jean Dykstra. I'm a photography writer and critic and the editor of Photograph magazine. And here from my house in Brooklyn to talk to Gary Green in his house in Waterville, Maine, about his wonderful new book, The River is Moving. So Gary, the pictures in A River is Moving am I saying it? Yeah, The River is Moving. They were taken over a period of 2 years along a stream near your home in Waterville. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're taken along the Messalonsky stream, which is a few hundred yards from where I live, in between where I live and where I work, and it's a nice little stream that runs to the Kennebec River and has some nice places to walk.
And the title of the book comes from a Wallace Stevens poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird.
Right.
And you start the book with a really beautiful quote from Mary Oliver, to pay attention, this is our endless and proper work, which is a really beautiful quote. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relationship of poetry to your photographic practice.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's very close to my practice in the sense that I've always thought of photography as a kind of poetry in how it operates, in how it operates as a language, because I think both mediums, you have concrete information, ideas, you have words in poetry, you have space, and in photographs you have visual information, you have surface, you have description of surface and description of, to some extent, of a three-dimensional landscape or whatever, flattened into 2 dimensions. But the thing that makes them so similar is that they both contain so many concrete facts, so many clear things that you can point to. A word means this or that or this or that, and what you see in a picture, a reflection, the water, a tree upside down, it's also a lot of facts, but neither medium really at its best concludes any particular answer or gives one particular answer to those facts. In other words, they can have so much information and yet not really be clear in what they say, or be open to a lot of interpretation. And that's what I've always thought was so puzzling. And I'm not a scholar at poetry, so there's some poetry I read and this is so amazing. I know all these words, and I even, but what is it? What is the poet saying? And I think photography operates best at that level too. It draws you in with all these interesting, with poetry, maybe the sound of the words or the look of the words on paper or the spaces in between. In photography, it may be the way something's described. It draws you in, but concluding what it means is never really, concluding what it means in one particular way is not really possible. So I like that. I like that it does that. And so I've always been drawn to that idea as both a teacher and a maker in describing, thinking of photography that way. And then there are certain poems and poetry, and I do love reading poetry when I read it, and I love hearing people read poetry. I get such a pleasure from it. And Wallace Stevens, not my well, he is one of my favorites, but very difficult, very difficult poet,
Yeah.
I think. But I think that poem is it's one of the outstanding poems of the 20th century, at least American. And I've used it for assignments, to prompt assignments. I've had design students make books, 13 ways of looking at, blackbird, or looking at anything, that kind of thing. So, and that's, so in that, there are a couple of phrases in that poem that were, that just, I know, the river is moving, the blackbird must be flying. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of innuendos or the beauty of, I should have looked.
I have it,
you
actually.
have it there? Can you read?
Because I typed that exact stanza. It's
yeah, thank you. Perfect.
I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just after.
Yeah, that's so, I mean, that's a whole poem, I think, right there, as is the river is moving, the blackbird must be flying. It's a stanza, but it says it all. And it was evening all afternoon. it had snowed and it looked like and it was going to snow, something like that. And if you live in Maine in the winter, it's always evening all afternoon. That's how I feel. By 2 o'clock, it's evening. It's getting dark, or 3 o'clock, it's almost dark in the darkest of winter. So that poem is a New England poem, an American poem. And so when I was making these pictures, it had nothing to do with that poem. But when I had to title them I think we had a faculty show, and I wanted to show some of them. Actually, they were really large at that point. And I just thought the river, I don't know why I thought the river's moving. That came right to me. And then I thought, well, maybe I could add the second phrase too. Maybe it works both ways, because the river is moving has so many meanings. It's moving, it moves literally, and it's moving, it moves us. Um, and the blackbird must be flying was important because of what that kind of implies these days, to me anyway, that if the river is not moving, the blackbird won't be flying, we won't be breathing, the world will stop turning. It's that kind of, it's all or nothing. The rivers can't stop and have the world continue. So I think that's really what I was thinking ultimately with it, because I try not to. And I know when I wrote the few words that I wrote in that book, I really pared it down for more that said a little bit more, and I didn't want to push that too hard. But I think
Yeah.
that's where that comes from. So it was sort of like a way to use one of my favorite poems in something that I did. And Mary Oliver, I love. So
Yeah.
I love her work. And that phrase, to put it up front, is just saying, look, this is a quiet book. It's about paying attention. And so the way I paid attention, I'd like the viewer, our most important work is to pay attention. So that's where all that comes from. But I frequently, I tell students to, when you're looking for titles, you're looking for epigraphs, or, anything like that. Go to the great poets, or like my other book, When Midnight Comes Around, that was named after a Velvet Underground song, so a lyric from a Velvet Underground song. So one or the other I try to use.
Yeah, lyrics are poetry, and lyrics are poetry. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me a little bit about how this series of photographs taken by this stream. How did that get started? I mean, how did you first sort of start to take those photographs, and how did they coalesce into a series in a book?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It started out as a phone pictures on a walk. It's a place that I frequently walk, or we walk, or walk with friends. And I just one day was photographing the reflections in the river in color on my iPhone. They just look really beautiful. I like the way the picture came out. And I think I maybe posted it on Instagram. Was I on it? I think so. Anyway, I liked the way the picture looked. And I thought, could I make more like that? Or could I make one on my real camera and make it bigger, nicer, whatever? And that's how it started. And so it was right toward the end of 2017. School was ending. Spring was kind of springing. And it was a way to kind of almost take one step out the door before I was quite finished teaching. I started going to the stream to enjoy the weather and my freedom, or soon to be real freedom, summer off and work. Um, and I started photographing with my big camera. Sometimes I use a 5x7-inch view camera. So I started doing that and bringing that, and that changed the work very much because the exposures weren't quick enough to really stop the river. So I started to get all this blur, which I liked, but I also wanted to get the other. So, I worked away at it. And so I photographed, I kept doing that through the seasons. And like I said, I made big prints at first, and I might again, because they're big negatives, and I can do that. But I immediately printed them as a portfolio once I had about 20, I think, to show to people to see what I could do with them. And so I think I printed them on like 13 by 19 inch paper, and made the prints smaller, kind of like a folio. And which was kind of leading to the book, which I think these days, that's just the way I'm thinking, is book, because we can do it now more easily, and the format is to me is perfect for photography. So I started with that, and I think I showed that portfolio, or the folio, to Gianluca and Gianmarco Gambarini, and as an idea for another book. And I showed them 2 or 3 ideas, and this is the one they really, really liked.
Mm.
And we talked about scale, and I, brought it down in scale quite a bit, and they brought it down a little more. They had a particular vision that meshed with mine, but was a little bit different. So, but that's what we worked on from there, the scale and the materials and everything like that. And that's where it was. It took about, so it took 2 years to make the work approximately, and then another year and a half, 2 years to kind of get it to on press and in the, bound as a book. Yeah.
Such a beautiful object. And I wanted to ask from the point of view of bookmaking about the decision for the cover to be in this really beautiful, delicate vellum.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
it
I think,
part of what makes it such a it's very tactile and just sort of beautiful, a nice object to hold.
thank you.
So
Yeah.
yeah, what was that decision?
That was, well, I think that really comes from the publishers, John Marco particularly. I made a dummy, as I do these days. It's so much easier with computer. Digital printing is so good, and so I usually make some books. And I made a book of it, and I used like I did in After Mirandi, which was much more the first book I did with them, much more my design, and I put in a sheet of vellum in that
Yeah.
was so you could see that first picture of his studio, and then so you see it through there, and then it opens and it reveals it completely, and you could still see After Mirandi on the other side, and it's just a material I love and I play with a lot. And so when it came to this book on the dummy, I think I had a photograph and then a piece of vellum like that. And John Marco immediately, the second time we met about this, he brought some of this paper, and it's almost like a glassine. It's like vellum, but it's like it makes a lot more noise, and it's
Yeah.
right. And he wanted to do that because he thought he liked the idea that it had a sound like the water, um,
Yes.
right, and then it also produced that sort of feeling like the river, and like the vellum did on the other book. So that was really, they came up with the binding and the this paper on the cover. And I think at the time when we were on press, I think we first had a picture beneath it, and it was too complicated. And then we tried a bunch of different things, and we just ended up printing, basically what is like a blank book, really,
Yeah.
without the vellum. And the binding, then they decided to create an open binding so you could see the stitching, the sewing, that's then glued over. So I think what I like about that too, and again, John Marco, and on the back, we did do another photograph that goes under the vellum on the back cover. So I think what it does is it makes for a delicacy, like you said, it makes a delicate object. It makes for a delicate object and a beautiful object, and it makes it kind of what's the right word? Delicate is one word. It's a handle with care. It's not a dust jacket. I mean, it will protect the book, but you have to protect it, kind of. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It'll get damaged easily, which I kind of like in a way. It shows care, and a certain bit of quiet. And but the other thing is it shows vulnerability. It shows the stitching. It shows the binding. It shows that you have to take care of things for them to. It shows the architecture and the vulnerability both. It shows the strength and the vulnerability of the object and of the river and of the birds and of us. And it creates all this metaphorical equivalent. I think I like to think of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
You know,
The pictures in the book, are many of them taken from the exact same spot?
many of
There's
them
a
are.
tree, a particular tree that seems to reappear,
Yes.
upside down in different sorts of reflections. One looks almost, like a charcoal drawing, sort of smudged and
Yes.
shadowy, and then another is much more clear. So I guess part of what I thought about was whether maybe it's both of these things, but whether, yes, that's it,
Yeah.
whether it's about a particular place or about the passage of time, or both, and those things and many more things.
Right, right. Yeah, no, exactly. And it's about all those things, I think. But it's less about a particular place. I mean, I mentioned the place because it's near home, and that's important that it is. It's a beautiful place, but it's not like stunning. It's just nice. It's a nice, quiet, beautiful place, but it's not spectacular. It's not the cliffs of Dover. It's not the Pacific Coast Highway. It's not even Jones Beach. It's a little stream and a lot of pine trees, piney woods, and maples, and some birch trees. And so it's much more, yeah, it's much more about the latter, what you said. It's much more about looking, slowing down. It's meditative. It's about paying attention again. It's about just the beauty of what's there and heightening our attention to it. I mean, just like lifting it up. And I think photographs, if they're successful, can do that. It could take the ordinary and just, make it extraordinary, or make it just a little bit transformed. And that's my hope, is that it's much more about everyday beauty, the beauty of the enduring landscape that we see, that still somehow in our completely overdeveloped, overfast, polluted world still endures with some clarity. It's still there, little bits of it. And so finding that and paying attention to that, like Mary Oliver says, I think is a big part of what's behind it.
It's interesting because your photographs in the last, I don't know, 20 years, are the ones that I've seen mostly have to do with nature, and this new landscape. This landscape isn't so new to you anymore, but Maine. And then I went back recently and started and looked at your photographs from downtown New York, and kind of the rock scene there. And I was really struck by how actually quiet those pictures are, considering what their subject is.
Right.
I mean, that seemed to be a through line for me from those pictures to the pictures that you take now, in the sense the landscape is completely different, obviously. But they're very, I mean, the pictures that you took of New York in those days, you tended to turn your camera away from the stage and catch small, quiet moments of the audience listening, or of two, people in a corner sharing a drink, or I was just struck looking at them again this time, actually how quiet and sort of meditative in a way they are, especially considering what you were photographing.
Right. Thank you. That's really nice, because I mean, often like the quick answer is always like, well, that really just has nothing to do with me, because I was 21, 22 years old, 23, 24, like that, my early 20s, when I did most of the best of that, I think. And so I just, I think, well, of course they're different, but I'm glad you said that. And a couple of people have said that, but not too many. And I think you're right. And I think the most interesting thing about that work is that I am looking away from the stage, and I'm looking at what's going on in front of me, wherever that is. And to me, that's fascinating. That's much more fascinating. When I've seen other books, there are people who have great pictures of performers. I have some, but they're not usually performing, but pictures of people who are known. And there's some people who just and they have everybody, everybody who ever played a CB. Bob Gruen is an example. He's photographed for so many years, photographed everybody, but it's not what he's photographing. He's looking at that person. He's serving the person portrayed, which is what I finally ended up getting, I think, tired of. I wanted to make my pictures where the subject matter wasn't the thing everybody talked about, and I think with this book, we managed to do that. I give Stanley Barker a lot of credit for finding the book within that work, to say it's not about just Deborah Harry or this person or that person. It's looking what was going on beyond, outside that, to the side of the frame, where other people framed here, maybe I framed here sometimes. And yeah, I guess they're quiet in the sense that I think I've always been somebody who's comfortable sitting down and just, or standing up in a corner and looking. And I'm an observer. I'm one of those people who always just, I can't stop looking at the world. And that scene was very interesting, and I loved the music. I mean, some of it. I obviously didn't like everything, but it was an exciting time to be there.
Yeah.
It was a good time for me in my 20s. It was a rough time for New York, but it was a good time to be there. And so thank you for saying that, because I think there is some truth to that. I mean, obviously, I've grown so much as a person. I mean, so many years have passed that, of course, my work is, more refined, I guess, now. But I'm glad to hear that you can see those qualities, because I'm sure uh, in some ways, I hadn't even gone to graduate school, but in some ways that was still, still me. Um,
Right.
yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Can we talk about the Morandi book a little
Sure.
bit?
Yeah.
It's so uh,
Yeah.
really an incredibly beautiful book. Um, it's all about, he's all about, he called himself a painter of tranquility and privacy, right? So, and he's all about photographing over and over again these objects, and not photographing, painting these objects in his studio. And the photographs you took in that book have this very similar kind of meditative quality, and a keen attention to these very everyday things. Sometimes things that aren't even, I mean, there's tools and there's vases and things, twine, but sometimes they're sort of just these pieces of wood or rock. And sometimes sort of, you know, constructed or piled in this Andy Goldsworthy sort of looking thing. So tell me a little bit about that project and what you were doing.
Yeah, that's a good. Well, yeah, this is again a different book. I feel like every book I've done is like a different experience, and now I realize, of course, it is. It should be. Um, so this one was not so conceived as The River is Moving. Was. I mean, I kind of saw that coming together, and actually, what it became was sort of what I planned in a sense. Those pictures of the stream with the trees reflected. After Morandi was the result of the first sabbatical I took. I decided I wanted to go to Italy. I'd never been to Italy, never been to any part of Italy, never been to the country. And I just got interested for a variety of reasons, the traditions of course, art, painting, the landscape, the cities. I just wanted to see it. And
Yeah.
uh, my wife went, and first we went to Bologna, and I wanted to go to Bologna first to see Morandi's house, because I heard it was there, and I'd always loved him for a long, long time anyway, loved his work. Didn't know much about him at the time, really, just what everybody else knows, the bottles and a couple different periods of his work. And I made a few pictures there, which was not easy. It's a very small place, and they kind of have it little museumed off now. Things are roped or whatever. And I didn't really I got permission to take my big 8x10 camera in, but I never said I need to get in and be in these space. I didn't know it'd be so difficult. There was only one person working there, and he said, I have to be here. I can't watch you, and I can't let you there. But anyway, I was able to make a few pictures. And after that, we did some, we were in Italy, and Pat went home, and I went to a residency in Assisi for a month, and that was sort of my big sabbatical plan. And I was going to take a series of walks in above Assisi at Mount Sabazio, where St. Francis wandered and walked, and also went into sort of solitude in the grotto or on the mountain, and. So I did that for a month. And while I was making those walks, I set up sort of an outdoor studio and started to try to make still lifes, because I just thought, Morandi, I'll try. I didn't think it would come to anything really. And in fact, some of them at first seemed so silly that I thought I'd never show them, like the picture with the pear and the string. I thought I'm just making little jokes, but I really grew fond of those.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do something really different. So as I was making those still lifes in this outdoor studio in direct light every day, I could be, in the shade, but outdoors, this beautiful pastoral, space on the mountain above Assisi. It was just amazing. And I'd make these still lifes. I left everything set up every day except the camera I'd bring in, and I'd move the things around. But I also started to notice around that, I don't know what to call it, estate, a little place that 5 or 6 artists were in the residency with me and the people who ran it. And I just started to notice the way they took care of their materials and segregated them, and put 3 boards against there and maybe a pile of stones, but there was some order to it. and things were given, things weren't thrown out. If there was a space to hang something that might be used later, it was put on the wall with, whatever it was. Some of it was useful, some of it was junk, but there was an attention to the materials. So when I got home, anyway, I'm making all these pictures, and I got home and I'm trying to do something with them. I also got into sort of residency at Yaddo after that, where I was able to develop and print everything and look at it and pin it up and put it and so in starting to look at the work, it wasn't coherent as a body of work. I did have these walks, and I still want to do something with them, a series of walks that I photographed. And that's much more pastoral. And although there are wires and man-made things in it, they're much more a traditional Italian landscape, I'd say. But nothing was really fitting together. And somehow I I think it was for the residency, I had to leave them a piece, and they did a show and a catalog, and I called the piece after Morandi, and it was one of the still lifes. So what if I made, look, I just put some text after Morandi. I did it up on the computer, and I put the picture of his studio, and I started throwing pictures into this, in my on my computer, putting pictures into like a book, and I started to realize it was so much more free flowing and fun to do pictures that way, to not say, okay, there's pictures, there's Mirandi's studio, or there's the walk and that. And I started to put together photographs that I'd made in Assisi, architectural photographs, a photograph that I made in Bologna that just reminded me so much of his painting. Um, this was in Bologna, and this was just a column. These were things I just hadn't seen before. I was never in Italy, so I was focusing on the beauty of the simple column of a building that's not remarkable, right? And then there was this, which was in Assisi. No, it's not that one. It's the first one. Let me just find that one. Not there. Somewhere in the beginning. Yeah. So that was in Assisi, and that really reminded me of Morandi, because the detail here reminds me of like maybe one of his bottles or fancy little bottles that he had, and I don't know, there's something about it, and
Yeah.
so I start to put pictures, and without there was not going to be a narrative, there was not going to be, or there's going to be, I think somebody called it a certain kind of Jerry Badger, you must know his stuff. He called it,
Yeah.
what did he call that kind of narrative? Anyway, it's a kind of narrative that's it's not linear, but it's a kind of narrative, and it works very well for the photo book, I think. So it's a book that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You just have to look at it and take it at face value. There are connections, and I think the connections are through the place, through the materials, through the wood, the rocks, the things that Morandi was contemplating. They're not necessarily the same things I'm contemplating, but they're ordinary, and I'm looking at them. And so again, it has that sense of a meditative picture, a slow picture, as Badger would call it, a quiet picture. That's what I'm always after. And so this book just had quietude all over it to me. It was like, it didn't even have a plot really. It's after Morandi, sometime after Morandi. And it's an homage, it's a conversation. It's not meant to be about Morandi. It's not meant like Joel Meyrowitz's book about his bottles or his place, although it is beautiful just to be there with those things is incredible. So that's how it went. That's a long story, I know, but that's how the book happened. And when it went that way, it came totally naturally to me. It was like I hate to say it because it was a lot of hard work and many iterations, but it was like a gift. I felt like I had to sit there, and it took probably over a year after those photographs before I saw it as a book.
Well, in a way, those kinds of books are much more interesting when the pictures have conversations with each other, but it doesn't just draw you on a straight line from the beginning to the end, but that you as a reader, as a viewer, can make your own meaning from it, and it's not just laid out right there for you. It's for you to interpret and for you to read on your own and make your own meaning and your own conversations and relationships from the different photographs. That's usually a much more interesting book.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what photo books are about versus, say, typical monographs of a giant project, which are, also great, and catalog, things like that. But what people call the photo book, like when I think of like the photo book, I think that's what I think of. I think of a book where the book is the finished piece, really. It's not just a collection of pictures. I mean, it may be, but it's not just that. So I think that, the best photo book makers, that's what they do. I think that's what they're trying to do, is create that tenuousness. I think John Gossage, would be somebody I'd point to. Say, he started doing that very early on, where you're making those matches, and they have to work. They can't be ridiculous. They can't be foolish, those connections, but they also can't be obvious. So there's like just a little um, thread, maybe connecting them at times.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's just visual, it's just the shape of something. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's the texture of something, sometimes it's where it was. But I enjoy that to like no end. I mean, to me, it's as pleasurable as making photographs, maybe more so. And I try to teach it as much as possible, because the students get interested in it, I think the more they learn about photography too, because it becomes a much more uh, potent language. I mean, like we were saying with poetry, it's like you could say so much in one photograph, and that's not much. But you got two and three and four, and all of a sudden they're talking. Yeah. And it's like visually they're talking, intellectually you're thinking, the conversation. So yeah, I appreciate that. That's totally the idea, and I wish every book had come like that. It's not always quite the case, but I try to go back to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's when it's really exciting, when a book comes together like that.
Mhm.
That's more elusive and more kind of
Yeah.
open-ended. It's interesting. I went back also to look at your terrain vague
Hmm.
series, and I was thinking about the presence of people in your pictures, or the lack thereof, because in terrain vague there are never any people, I think, but there's always some evidence of people,
Hmm.
whether it's tire tracks or telephone wires or something. Um, but in this newest book, there really aren't any people. I mean, it really is all about nature. And I wonder, and I looked at your interiors series
Yeah.
too, which
Mhm.
are really beautiful and kind of heartbreaking images in a way of interiors that are abandoned. Um, I remember a gym,
Yeah.
but the buildings are sort of really falling down.
Mhm.
And I wonder what you think about in terms of alluding to human presence in your pictures or not.
Right. Yeah, that's another good question. I mean, I'd say like there are other series I did, like that series of tree torsos that I made, that probably have, if any, presence a little bit, like a cut off branch or something like that. But yeah, I think lately I feel like it's incumbent upon me to include the built environment in some way. I mean, uh, I remember I read Robert Adams at one point, it's a long time ago, said something like at one point in his career photographing, he felt that he was being dishonest if he didn't include some of that. In other words, you have to kind of work to take it out of the picture. And I thought, yeah, I know what he's saying. You don't want to pretend that the world is a wilderness. Um, so with the new book, yeah, what did I think? It occurred to me that I was making a book about nature, and what is that anymore, right? And then I thought, well, I've done it before. I think the photographs of prairies sometimes had signs of man's, scars on the property on the land from something a person did, or a truck or a car, whatever related to a person. But the new one was really consciously about pure nature. And I think it was just the time we were living through. And I'm talking 2017. So, we were already in this last 4 years, and it just felt like, I don't care. I'm going to spend some time looking for beauty, and I don't care where I find it. And if
Absolutely.
it doesn't show an old building, or something about a person, then that's okay. And so I gave myself that license, really, because I feel like I try not to do that. And it also, after a while, that's not what interests me most. I am interested in people. I'm interested in people
Yeah.
as a society. I'm interested where we live, what it looks like, how we treat the places we live. I think that's what's important. I also, even I did the early portraits, and I still make portraits of people if that are constructed, not on the street. I'm just not comfortable with it that much anymore. I'm not saying it's bad. I wish I could do it. I mean, I wish in some ways I could do that, but I'm pretty content photographing how I photograph. I think I pursue my time photographing is very quiet time. I'm always, almost always anyway, by myself, because that's important to be by myself, not talking, not unless it's to myself, which sometimes I do. But you know what I mean? I really feel interior. I go into a zone where I'm totally, there I am. And that's one reason. And when people come up to me sometimes with a big camera, they might like, what are you doing? Or what are you taking a picture of? I'm startled almost. I'm almost like coming out of a dream. Like, what did you? So that's part of the process. And I don't know how important that is, but it feels like it is to me. But I also think it's important to show the world we live in. And the world we live in is not just the stream, it's the buildings, it's those interiors of places that we abandoned rather than kept up or we couldn't keep up. It's some sort of story. And it's about the change in our landscape. I mean, since I've been photographing in this area, what I call Central Maine, which is about 10 or 12 years now, and the interiors is part of that. I mean, I've seen these places, some of them come and go 2 times, 3 times. I've seen some of them just change, just stay, become a different business or, go have a makeover or something. And then other things just stay the same year after year after year. And that's fascinating to me. And so to some extent, that's what my work is about, is looking at landscape, looking at our landscape as it is. And again, going back to Mary Oliver, paying attention, trying to heighten the attention, heighten my own attention and heighten people's attention by making photographs of things that might seem uh, desolate or sometimes questionable as to what it is, just a piece of land, a piece of dirt, abandoned lot. And I've always been attracted to those places. I've always been attracted to these quiet landscapes. Even as a kid, I liked walking through abandoned lots, like lots on your corner or something. If you grew up where there was land at all, where I grew up, there was some land, suburbs, but there were always places that hadn't been built at that point, hadn't been developed. And you'd find things there. You'd find things people left, sometimes something valuable, like an old toy gun or an old a trailer that's missing a wheel, what do you call it? A wagon that's missing a wheel. I'd go for that stuff. I still do.
Right, right,
So that's
right.
part of it too. These are spaces I somehow find a lot of meaning in these empty spaces, the terrain vague, and the interiors that are left alone. And yeah, they're kind of sad, but I guess they're kind of sad pictures, I think, but they're also I think hopeful or redeemed by the images, by a certain tenderness toward them that I think I try to show.
Well, they're redeemed by your attention, I think.
Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, redeemed by
Yeah.
the
Well,
paid.
I wanted to maybe end with a quote of yours from an interview, which I thought it comes right from what you're saying, actually. You said, if we can see the grace in quotidian landscapes and our everyday routines, then perhaps we can begin to make better choices. I would add that our culture's love of the new doesn't bode well in that regard. And I thought that was such a great quote. And I just wanted to ask, it may seem obvious, but what you had in mind when you were thinking of the better choices that we might make if we paid attention.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking of one of them yesterday because or the day before I was in town, right downtown Waterville, and we have an old post office that it's an incredible building, and they moved out to like a 100 yards down the street to a little ugly building, that has more better for shipping. They could drive the trucks up, that kind of thing. But this building's beautiful. Right now, there's like a beer, like a pub kind of place that's in the basement of the old post office. And the other, I think there are a couple businesses that have tried to like use some of the rooms. I mean, it's really sad. And I keep thinking, we are building, Colby's building a couple buildings downtown and things are looking up and some things are getting rehab, but this post office is like a gem. And why did they let this happen? Maybe they could have destroyed part of it and put in it could have stayed the post office. It would have been, it's nice when you go to a post office and it's the old post office, whether you're in New York although now you have a beautiful train station instead. But you know what I mean? You go to the local post office and it's intact. It's got the old wood. It's got the marble floors. It's, you know, it was built at a time where we can't even build like that anymore. We don't have the money, the materials. But I think I think that's an example, you know, of not, you know, and I think Colby is saving a couple old buildings and rehabbing them, reusing them. Uh, and it's hard when they reach a certain point, like the old gym is in terrible shape. And people are trying to use it now. They're trying to figure out ways to bring it back, but it's hard because it has been just reined in and, you know, just it's so degraded.
Mm.
And those are the kind of things I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of you know, signage and trees and green spaces when people design towns. You know, we have this big, what they call the concourse, which came from, what do you call it, urban renewal in the 60s. They took down these old houses. These streets were just erased. And I know they were in rough shape, I've heard, I wasn't here, but, and they made into a big parking lot with like now it's like 4 different dollar stores, you know, all the ones are represented there. We got Dollar Tree, we got, you know, it's like, it's terrible. And then this big parking lot that's just kind of ugly. And, you know, that's the kind of thing I'm thinking, you know, we have to pay attention to where we live, not just to where we get out of the car and where we get back in the car. And we need to, as a society, pay attention to so that we walk places and look at where we're going and not just like talk and like, you know, I'm always amazed that people, one of the problems I had when I did run is I couldn't, it was hard to run. I always want to look. And it seems so silly to be running around this beautiful place and not look at it, but it
Right.
wasn't comfortable. So anyway, that's what I think, you know, yeah, that the words are more beautiful than I can say it now. But the quotidian, attention to the quotidian is important. Attention to our own home, our, you know, our beautiful little home instead of these, you know, McMansions and uh, uh, houses with 3 garages, and the 3 garages are the front of the house, not the, you don't even know where the door is. It's all garage, right? And it's, so yeah, it's a call for beauty. It's a call to pay attention and wake up. And just, it's not a call to, you know, it's not a loud call. It's just like, please pay attention. Look, this is, you know, it's looking at what we've left behind. These are, this old chair has memories. There's like a value to it. Kids ran around and screamed and played here. People took classes there. People had a life and died in this little town. You know, it's something about that I don't think people get enough. And maybe that's because, you know, maybe it's happier to avoid those kinds of things, but I think about them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that all shows in your books
Thank
for
you.
sure, that attention and that thoughtfulness.
Thank you. That's all I got is you know, all I can do in a way, but I appreciate that. And I
Well,
appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about it. It's great to see you.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
All right, Jean, thank you, and stay well
You
and
too.
get the vaccine as soon as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gary.
All right.
Bye.
Hope to see you soon. Bye.